there is a quiet kind of pain. One that does not scream, one that does not demand attention, but slowly, deeply, lives inside you. There is a kind of pain that does not announce itself loudly. It does not break things around you or draw attention from others. Instead, it settles quietly within, growing in the spaces where your expectations once lived. This pain begins when you consistently show up for someone, fully, sincerely, without hesitation, and slowly realize that the same presence is never returned to you. You become the person they rely on, the one they call when their world feels heavy. You listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart. You try to understand their struggles, their fears, their confusion. You offer comfort, advice, silence when needed, and strength when they feel weak. You make time for them, even when your own life feels overwhelming. Even when you are tired, even when you are drained, you still choose to be there. At first, it feels meaningful. It feels like connection. You tell yourself this is what care looks like. This is what it means to be important to someone. And so you continue, giving more of your attention, more of your patience, more of your emotional energy. You don't keep score, because you believe that genuine relationships are not about counting who gives more. But slowly, something begins to shift. There are moments when your own heart feels heavy, moments when you need someone to sit with you in your silence, to understand your pain without you having to explain everything. You hesitate at first because you are used to being the strong one. But eventually, you reach out in the same way they always did, and what meets you is not the same. Maybe they respond late. Maybe they seem distracted. Maybe they offer a few empty words and move on. Or maybe they are simply not there at all. No presence, no effort, no real attempt to understand what you are going through. You start to question it. You tell yourself they might be busy. Maybe they're going through something. Maybe it's just bad timing. So you ignore that feeling in your chest, the one that quietly tells you something is not right. But it keeps happening. You are there for them again and again. But when your turn comes, there is always a gap, an absence, a silence that feels heavier than words. And this is where the quiet pain deepens. Because it is not just about them not being there. It is about the realization that you would never do the same to them. That if the roles were reversed, you would show up without hesitation. You would listen. You would care. You would make space for them, no matter what, but they don't. And that difference begins to weigh on you. You start to feel alone, even in a connection that once felt close. You begin to hold things inside, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel safe saying it. You become quieter, more distant, not out of anger, but out of understanding. A silent understanding that your presence is not being met with the same depth. And yet, you still give, not because you are weak, but because it is in your nature to care. But each time you do, a small part of you feels the imbalance more clearly. A small part of you recognizes that this is no longer mutual. This is the pain of one-sided support. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady and deeply human. An imbalance in effort and care does not always reveal itself in obvious ways. It rarely begins with something dramatic or undeniable. Instead, it grows quietly, hidden beneath small moments that are easy to ignore at first. A delayed reply, a lack of curiosity about your feelings, a pattern of taking without giving. At the beginning, these things seem insignificant, almost unworthy of concern. You convince yourself that relationships naturally have phases, that sometimes one person gives more than the other. So you continue to give. You invest your time without hesitation. You adjust your schedule to be available for them. You listen when they need to speak, even when the same stories repeat themselves. You offer support, reassurance, and understanding, not because you expect something in return, but because you believe this is what genuine care looks like. You tell yourself that effort should be unconditional, that love should not feel like a transaction. But slowly, the imbalance becomes harder to ignore. You begin to notice that the energy you give is not reflected back to you. When they need you, you are present. When you need them, they are distant. When they speak, you listen with patience. When you speak, their attention drifts. When they struggle, you make space for their emotions. When you struggle, there is little room for yours. And still you hesitate to call it what it is. Because part of you hopes that things will change, that maybe they will realize, that maybe one day they will show up for you in the same way you have shown up for them. So you give more, you try harder, you become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. But effort without reciprocity does not create balance. It creates exhaustion. There comes a point where you start to feel the weight of everything you have been carrying. Not just their problems, but the responsibility of maintaining the connection itself. You become the one who initiates conversations, the one who checks in, the one who keeps things alive. And without even realizing it, you begin to carry the relationship alone. This is where the imbalance turns into something deeper. It is no longer just about effort. It becomes about value. Because when someone consistently receives your care without offering the same in return, it begins to send a message, not always intentional, but clear. A message that your presence is convenient, but not essential. That your effort is expected, but not appreciated in the same way. And this realization does not come all at once. It builds slowly through repeated experiences, through moments where you feel unseen, through conversations that feel one-sided, through the quiet recognition that if you stop trying, everything would likely fall apart. That is when you begin to understand the truth. A connection cannot survive on one person's effort alone. No matter how strong your intentions are, no matter how deeply you care, you cannot create balance by yourself, because balance requires two people who are equally willing to give, to listen, to show up, not perfectly, but consistently. And when that is missing, something inside you begins to shift. You start to hold back, not out of spite, but out of awareness. You begin to notice how much of yourself you have been giving away. You realize that care, when it flows in only one direction, slowly turns into depletion. Not because caring is wrong, but because it was never meant to be one-sided. And in that awareness, the imbalance becomes undeniable. Not through words, not through confrontation, but through a quiet understanding that what you are giving is not being returned in the same way. Streaming interrupted, waiting for the complete message. There comes a moment in every one-sided connection where the truth begins to surface, not loudly, not all at once, but in a way that is impossible to ignore forever. It is not the absence of someone that hurts the most. It is the realization that they were capable of being there and still chose not to. At first, you protect them from this truth. You create explanations to soften the impact. You tell yourself they are busy, that life is overwhelming for them, that maybe they just don't know how to respond. You give them the benefit of the doubt again and again, because accepting anything else feels too heavy. It is easier to believe in circumstances than to accept a lack of care. So you continue to excuse what you feel. When they don't show up, you justify it. When they seem distant, you rationalize it. When they fail to notice your pain, you convince yourself that maybe you didn't express it clearly enough. You take responsibility for things that were never yours to carry, all in an effort to maintain the image you have of them. But reality has a way of revealing itself, no matter how much you try to reshape it. You begin to notice patterns, not just isolated moments, but repeated choices. Times when they were available for others, but not for you. Moments when they had the energy for things that mattered to them, but not for your presence. Situations where they could have reached out, could have asked, could have cared, but didn't. And slowly, the truth becomes harder to avoid. It is not that they couldn't be there. It is that they didn't choose to be. This realization does not come with anger at first. It comes with a quiet kind of shock, a stillness, because deep down, you always believed that if someone truly cared, they would show it. Not perfectly, but sincerely. You believed that effort was natural when connection was real. So when that effort is missing, you begin to question everything. You replay moments in your mind. You think about all the times you showed up for them without hesitation. All the times you made space, and even when it was difficult. And you compare it, not to measure, but to understand, to make sense of why the same energy was never returned to you. And that is when it starts to hurt in a deeper way, because now it is no longer about misunderstanding or miscommunication. It is about intention, about choice, about the silent decisions someone makes, When they decide where to invest their time, their attention, and their care, you begin to see that people act according to what matters to them. Not what they say, not what they promise, but what they consistently do. And in that understanding, you are forced to face something difficult. You are not a priority in the way you believed you were. This is not an easy truth to accept because it challenges the meaning you placed on the connection. It forces you to let go of the idea that things were equal, that feelings were mutual, that effort was simply delayed and would eventually come. Instead, you see things as they are, not through hope, not through excuses, but through clarity. And clarity can be painful. It removes illusions. It strips away the comfort of maybe and replaces it with certainty. A quiet, undeniable certainty that someone who had the ability to be the you chose not to be. And in that moment, something inside you shifts. Not in a dramatic way, but in a deeply internal one. You stop waiting in the same way. You stop expecting without awareness. You begin to see the connection for what it truly is, not what you wished it could be. And even though no words are spoken, no confrontation takes place, this realization changes everything. Because once you see that it was a choice, you can no longer convince yourself it was anything else. Loving deeply is often misunderstood. In a world that moves quickly, where connections are sometimes shallow and temporary, depth can feel out of place. When you care with sincerity, when you give your attention fully, when you invest your emotions without holding back, it can seem like you are doing too much, especially when that energy is not returned in the same way. But the truth is, there is nothing wrong with loving deeply. The problem begins when that depth is given to someone who does not have the capacity to receive it, understand it, or reflect it back to you. Not everyone knows how to hold what you offer. Not everyone recognizes the value of genuine presence, of consistent care, of emotional honesty. And when these two worlds meet, your depth and their limitation, there is a quiet imbalance that forms. At first, you may not see it clearly. You believe that if you continue to show love, they will eventually understand it. That your consistency will inspire their consistency. That your effort will awaken something within them. So you remain patient. You give them time. You overlook the small signs that suggest they are not meeting you at the same level. You tell yourself that people express love differently. And while that is true to some extent, there is a difference between expressing love differently and not expressing it at all. There is a difference between someone trying in their own way and someone simply taking what is given without any real intention of giving back. This is where confusion begins, because you start to question yourself. You wonder if you are expecting too much, if your standards are too high, if your way of caring is somehow unrealistic. You compare your depth to their distance and assume that you might be the one who needs to change. But this is not about being too much. It is about being in the wrong place. When you offer something meaningful to someone who cannot recognize its value, it does not make your offering excessive. It simply means it is misplaced. Your care does not lose its worth just because it is not appreciated. Your effort does not become a weakness just because it is not returned. The issue is not the depth of your love. The issue is the direction in which it is given. Some people are not emotionally available. Some are not ready. Some have not learned how to show up for others in a real and consistent way. And no matter how much you give, no matter how patient you are, you cannot teach someone to value what they are not yet capable of understanding. This realization can be difficult to accept because it requires you to separate your identity from their response. It asks you to stop measuring your worth based on how someone else treats you. It challenges the belief that if you just try harder, love more, or give more time, things will eventually become balanced. But depth is not something you need to reduce. It is something you need to protect, because the ability to love with sincerity, to care without calculation, to be present without distraction, these are not weaknesses. These are rare qualities. They are strengths that should be shared where they are seen, where they are respected, where they are returned. And when they are not, it does not mean you need to become less. It means you need to become more aware of where you place that depth. Not everyone will meet you there. Not everyone will understand it. But that does not make your way of loving wrong. It simply means it deserves to be given in a space where it can exist fully, without being diminished. Forgetting yourself does not happen all at once. It is not a sudden decision, not a moment where you consciously choose to disappear. It happens slowly, through small compromises that seem harmless at first. You adjust a little here, you stay quiet a little there, you give a bit more than you planned. And before you realize it, these small moments begin to shape a pattern. You start to place their needs above your own. Not because you have to, but because you want to, because caring for them feels natural. Because seeing them okay brings you a sense of peace. So you begin to prioritize their emotions, their comfort, their time. You become more aware of their moods than your own. You learn how to respond in ways that keep things smooth, ways that avoid conflict, ways that ensure they remain comfortable. And in doing so, you slowly move away from yourself. You begin to silence your own needs. Not completely at first, but gradually. When something bothers you, you tell yourself it's not worth mentioning. When you feel hurt, you convince yourself it will pass. When you need support, you hesitate because you are not used to being the one who asks. You become the one who understands, the one who adapts, but who makes space. But who makes space for you? This question lingers quietly in the background, often ignored, often pushed aside. Because acknowledging it would mean confronting something uncomfortable, that the balance you have created does not include you in the way it should. So instead, you continue. You give more of your time, even when you are exhausted. You offer more of your energy, even when you feel drained. You stay present for them, even when your own mind feels heavy. And over time, this constant giving begins to take something from you. Not all at once, but piece by piece. You lose the habit of checking in with yourself. You stop asking what you need, what you feel, what you want. Your focus becomes external, always directed toward them, always centered around maintaining the connection. And without realizing it, your identity begins to shift. You are no longer just yourself. You become the role you play in their life. The supporter, the listener, the one who is always there. And while these roles are not inherently negative, they become limiting when they are the only parts of you that remain visible. When your own thoughts, desires, and emotions take a secondary place, something essential begins to fade. You start to feel disconnected, not from them, but from yourself. There are moments when you sense it. A quiet emptiness. A feeling that something is missing, even though you are constantly giving. You may not be able to fully explain it, but it is there. A subtle awareness that you have been pouring so much into someone else that there is very little left for you. And still, you hesitate to change. Because part of you fears that if you stop giving the same way, the connection might weaken. That if you start prioritizing yourself, you might be seen differently. So you continue to hold everything together, even at the cost of your own well-being. But the truth remains, whether you acknowledge it or not, you cannot maintain a healthy connection while abandoning yourself. Because the more you ignore your own needs, the more unbalanced everything becomes. Not just externally, but internally. You begin to feel the weight of everything you have been carrying, not just for them, but against yourself, and that weight grows quietly. Not as anger, not as resentment at first, but as exhaustion. A deep, steady exhaustion that comes from giving without receiving, from showing up without being seen, from caring without being cared for in return. And in that exhaustion, there is a realization waiting to be seen, that somewhere healing does not begin in a moment of strength. It begins in a moment of clarity, a quiet realization that something within you can no longer continue the way it has been. Not because you suddenly stopped caring, but because you finally see the cost of caring without limits. At first, this awareness feels unfamiliar. You are so used to focusing on someone else that turning inward feels almost uncomfortable. You notice how much of your time has been given away, how much of your energy has been invested, how much of your emotional space has been occupied. And for the first time in a long while, you begin to ask a simple but powerful question. What about me? This question is not selfish. It is necessary. Because healing requires you shift your attention back to yourself, not in a way that closes you off from others, but in a way that restores balance within you. It asks you to look at your own needs with the same care you once gave so freely to someone else. You start by noticing your limits. Where you once said yes without thinking, you begin to pause, not out of rejection, but out of awareness. You begin to understand that your time is valuable, that your energy is not endless, that your presence deserves to be respected, including by yourself. And with this awareness, boundaries begin to form, not as walls, but as quiet lines of self-respect. You no longer feel the need to be available at all times. You no longer rush to fix what is not yours to fix. You begin to step back from situations that drain you, even if part of you still feels the urge to stay. This is not easy. It goes against the habits you have built, the patterns you have followed for so long. But something inside you has changed. You start to recognize that constantly giving without receiving is not kindness, it is self-neglect. And true care, even for others, must include care for yourself. So you begin to reclaim what you once gave away so freely. Your time becomes more intentional. Your attention becomes more selective. Your energy becomes more protected. You choose where to invest, where to engage, where to step back. This does not mean you stop being a caring person. It means your care becomes grounded in awareness rather than impulse. You begin to understand that not every situation deserves your full presence. Not every person is meant to receive your depth. And in this understanding, something within you starts to feel lighter. There is less pressure to prove your worth through constant effort. Less need to hold everything together. Less fear of what might happen if you stop overextending yourself. Instead, there is space. Space to rest, space to think, space to reconnect with parts of yourself that were once ignored. You begin to notice your own emotions more clearly. You allow yourself to feel without immediately pushing those feelings aside. You listen to your own thoughts, your own needs, your own boundaries. And in doing so, you rebuild a connection that was slowly lost, a connection with yourself. This process is not loud. It is not something others may immediately see. It happens internally through small but consistent shifts, through moments where you choose yourself when you would have once chosen someone else, through decisions that prioritize your well-being, even when it feels unfamiliar. And over time, these small changes create something stronger. Not distance, not coldness, but stability. A sense that you are no longer depending on someone else to feel valued, to feel seen, to feel complete. You begin to understand that what you were seeking externally must first exist within you. And in that understanding, healing quietly takes root. Not as a sudden transformation, but as a steady return. A return to your own worth, a return to your own balance, a return to yourself. And so, after everything you have felt, everything you have given, and everything you have come to understand, there is only one truth left to hold on to. You were there, fully, sincerely, without hesitation. And that matters. Not because it changed them, but because it reveals who you are. But now it is time to turn that same presence inward. No more waiting for someone to choose you while you continue to choose them. No more hoping that one day they will become who you needed them to be. Because the lesson was never about them changing. It was about you seeing clearly. Seeing where your energy was going. Seeing what was not being returned. Seeing that your value does not decrease just because someone failed to recognize it. You do not need to chase understanding. You do not need to prove your worth. You do not need to stay where you feel unseen. What you gave was real, but what you accept must now be real too. So walk away from what drains you, not with anger, not with resentment, but with awareness. Let go, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself. And in that quiet decision, you reclaim something far more important than any one-sided connection ever gave you: your peace.